Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Locked On Cavs, rated 5 stars on Apple Podcasts by Cleveland Frowns, who says, super corny at times, but what's not to love? Cleveland Frowns, we thank you and everyone else for making Locked On Cavs your first listen. You can find us 5 days a week for free anywhere you can find your podcast. We're now on YouTube as well, so you make sure you subscribe. But on today's show, will the Utah Jazz be the biggest test for Cleveland's rebounding issues? Should we be worried about Darius Garland's back? Hear about this and some possible trade deadline moves on today's Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everyone, Evan Dammerl here once again. You can see my Twitter handle below. I am one of the co-hosts of Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast and part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My co-host Chris Manning is a little busy with work and some personal life stuff, so I'm flying solo, spreading my wings and leaving the nest for the first time. But on today's show, we'll be breaking down the Utah Jazz and how there would be a test for Cleveland's rebounding issues, how Darius Garland is doing, and some possible trade ideas. But first, the Cleveland Cavaliers won last night against the Sacramento Kings 109-108. It was a bit of a nail-biter in the end. Cleveland did not have an 81-point first half like they did at home at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, but the Cavs clearly looked like a team that was playing on the second game of a back-to-back, and they responded well. Jared Allen was especially hard on himself after the loss to the Golden State Warriors, saying that he needs to be better in terms of rebounding. And I think he responded great with 18 points, 17 boards, and 2 blocks. Evan Mobley was also phenomenal with 17 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 blocks, and a sweet fadeaway. In the league should be on notice if they cannot defend Evan Mobley properly. Speaking of rebounding, though, Darius Garland had a nice bounce back game himself. He finished the night with 12 points, 11 assists, 1 steal, and only 4 turnovers. And he scored those 12 points in 5 of 13 shooting, only 1 free throw attempt, though, in this game for Garland. I've noticed this thing about Darius for a while now where it reminds me a bit of Kyrie Irving during the Mike Brown return era for a season when the Cavs' big three was Kyrie, Luol Deng, and Spencer Hawes. Kyrie was being a bit more meticulous with his game at this point, looking to get his teammates involved, and it was clear Darius was getting his teammates involved in this game with the 11 dimes. But Kyrie would consistently pour it on in the fourth quarter and really just lay into opponents. And that's what Darius started to do against Sacramento, where he finally started to look comfortable and find his rhythm again. I think the back issues are still a little bit of a problem. JB Bickerstaff shared post-game with Serena Winters, former Locked On podcast alumni Serena Winters, that Darius's back is still bothering him, but he gutted it out. But I think he'll be okay. It'll be interesting to see how he rests and recovers the game in between leading up to the Utah Jazz. But what is still apparent and still an issue for the Cavs is the lack of rebounding. And it's kind of scary when you're starting 3 7-footers. Over the last 5 games, including the Indiana Pacers, the Portland Trail Blazers, the Sacramento Kings, the Golden State Warriors, and the Memphis Grizzlies, the Cavs have given up 74 second chance opportunities during that span. In turn, that's led to 80 second chance points for Cleveland's opponents, which is not ideal, to say the least. And JB Bickerstaff has said, especially in their loss to Golden State, that if the Cavs didn't give up so many offensive boards, because Golden State was the biggest offender of this. Let me pull up their stats as I chat here. But Golden State scored 22 second chance point opportunities, which is suboptimal, to say the least. And that's frustrating. And if you look at a team like Utah, who's up next on the docket, the Jazz are only the 15th best offensive rebounding team, averaging 10.4 per game, but they're still roughly in the same spot as Portland, Sacramento, Indiana, and Golden State, who they gave the most offensive boards to. There really doesn't seem to be a quick remedy for this, and you have to wonder what exactly the Cavs can do in order to fix this problem. But I think a lot of it is playing with effort and intensity. JV Bickerstaff shared with me post-game. I kind of threw him a softball and I asked him, hey, coach, this seems like your team is starting to get into a groove toward down the stretch against Sacramento, because it was an up and down game against Portland. It was a tough loss to Golden State. It was clear Cleveland was coming off a tough loss in the second of a back-to-back against Sacramento at first, and looked a little slow and a little rusty, other than Jared Allen and Kevin Love as well, who was sensational off the bench. But do you think you're finding your groove? And he said, no, we're still figuring it out. He said the Cavs are not playing their brand and their identity of basketball, where they're a defensive first team and they capitalize on playing hard for a full 48 minutes, which is a tried and true coaching cliche. Larry Markin actually said soon after Bickerstaff that it's impossible for someone to play a full 48 minutes. I think he was dissecting the logic of the quote, not the fact that JB just wants his team to give their all for all 48 minutes. And the Cavs are still refining that identity. And on a West Coast road trip like this, it's tough to do that. You're jumping to a lot of places, a lot of different time zones. You're in Portland one night, and then in San Francisco, and then Sacramento. Now you're heading to Utah, and then you have to play Oklahoma City and San Antonio before you get to come home against Brooklyn, where Kyrie Irving may play again. So the Cavs kind of have to figure this out. I don't know if there's an immediate solution, because logically speaking, they're starting Larry Markkinen, who's 7 feet tall, Evan Mobley, who's 7 feet tall, Jared Allen, who's 6'11", but we'll call him 7 foot if you include the afro, and Lamar Stevens, who is a power forward that is being asked to play small forward, but now started shooting guard for Cleveland. They have some size in their starting lineup. They also have Kevin Love coming off the bench. They have Dylan Windler, who's an elite rebounder, who seldom plays, but still an elite rebounder nonetheless. And you have to kind of find some happy space here. Garland has shared in the past, when he flirted with a triple-double earlier in the season, that the rebounding for the guards is a product of their system. And it makes sense, because if you look at Garland, he had 2 boards in the game against Sacramento. Rajon Rondo had 3. Jetty Osman had 2. Even Dylan Windler had 5 as playing shooting guard instead of small forward at this point for Cleveland. It's just really tough to figure out what's going to happen, because Utah is, again, a tough, physical, defensive-minded team, and they could give the Cavs a taste of their medicine. There could be no Rudy Gobert in this one because of health and safety protocols, but they still have Hassan Whiteside. They still have plenty of quality players. They're playing Rudy Gay at center, which could be an interesting wrinkle against even Evan Mobley or Larry Markkinen. I doubt Jared Allen will defend him in the paint, but this is a fundamentally sound Jazz team, and I wonder how the Cavs are going to kind of respond, because it's becoming a bit of an issue that this big lineup theoretically is kind of played out at this point. And I was wrong, by the way. I had the Golden State stats pulled up. Garland had 5 rebounds against Sacramento. Rajon Rondo had 4. Kevin Love had 3. Jared Allen obviously crashed the glass with 17, and Evan Mobley had 7. So I was a little wrong. My apologies there. But maybe they lean a little more on Dean Wade, but they need to play to their size. They need to play to their strengths. They need to kind of just play fundamental basketball, because boxing out is a fundamental component. And I think if you have those 7-footers form a wall, a fucking wall, to quote Stan Van Gundy, the guards can capitalize on those opportunities, and then they can get out on the break and play fast like the Cavs like to do under JB Bickerstaff. It's definitely something worth monitoring going forward. I'm curious to see kind of how this develops. And yeah, I don't know. This Utah game is going to be interesting. Chris and I will talk about this more at length for Wednesday's episode. But for now, let's put a pin on that conversation. I'll bring Chris back into the fold after he talks about this, and maybe we can discuss this a little bit more, maybe break down more of who is and isn't available, because in the next segment, we're going to be breaking down Darius Garland's back concerns, and he could be out against Utah if he needs more time to rest. But I want to give you a quick word from today's sponsor, BetOnline. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. New year and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use their promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, do not take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, before we talk about Darius Garland and his back issues, I just want to thank all of you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen. For your next listen, check out Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts, including yours truly. Listen to Locked On Now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or watch it on the Locked On NBA YouTube channel. So it's a little tricky. Darius Garland hurt his back late in the loss to the Golden State Warriors on Sunday night. It was a little bit of a concern. I had a couple fans asking me, did anybody ask about Garland's back injury? To be frank, I didn't think it was a matter of concern. I just noticed he was just, I didn't think it was a big deal. So I watched the injury report closely. I asked a few folks within the org, just kind of like just bouncing around, just kind of figuring out like people who were close to Garland too, just like, hey, is he going to be okay? Kind of got the impression he was going to be fine, but I wanted to make sure it was officially reported. So around 4:30, 5:30 time yesterday, Eastern, it was said Darius wasn't listening to the injury report. It was just Sexton, Rubio, and Okoro. Was Sexton and Rubio obviously being out for the year, and Okoro out for probably 2 more weeks or so. You could really tell against Sacramento, his back was hurting. You could tell he was favoring it. He was moving a little bit slower. I think he didn't have as much lift in his shot because of the back injury. You could really tell he went 1 for 6 from 3-point range in this game. Let me double check, make sure I don't have the wrong box score pulled up again. Yeah, he went 1 for 6 from 3-point range. And you could tell that Darius instead was trying to, JB Bickerstaff kind of put this well, where Darius was reading the opposing defense, the look Sacramento was throwing at him, and try to be a step ahead and play chess instead of checkers in this one and make those quick reads to Evan Mobley, because Evan Mobley is acting as a primary offensive hub, and that really juices the Cavs offense again. If they can't defend him properly, the league is in trouble in a year or two, and he had some weight to his frame. But Darius looked a little concerning. I think just playing on a back-to-back is suboptimal. It's also the fact that Rajon Rondo is 35 years old and in his 16th season in the NBA, so you realistically cannot ask him to go out there and play the almost 34 minutes that Darius Garland played last night. To be fair, though, Rondo played about 20. That's right about the sweet spot where JB Bickerstaff wants to play him at, and they play together in tandem. I think that really helps a lot too. I think Bickerstaff, if this is a problem against Utah and possibly a problem going forward until he has proper time to rest and rehab, whether it's during the All-Star break coming up or maybe the Cavs shut him down for a few games and just let him rest his back properly. I don't think it's a serious issue. It seems like a tweak thing. JB Bickerstaff didn't seem concerned when talking about it. A lot of players in general just kind of played off of Garland and kind of made him better. Like, again, I said Rondo and Garland working together in tandem is something Bickerstaff already said he wants to explore more. So maybe they lean more on that if he is available Wednesday against Utah. You can see Rondo acting as a primary initiator and Garland playing off ball, because this is something they kind of try to use with Colin Sexton on the floor, because Colin Sexton is effective off ball, but he's also really effective with the ball in his hands. And Garland's 3-point gravity and the fact that he is such a 3-point threat really helps Cleveland long-term here, obviously. But it's definitely interesting to watch how this unfolds. It's definitely interesting to see how he deals with this. It could be an issue, especially against Utah, where they could throw Donovan Mitchell at him. They could throw Mike Conley at him. They could throw Royce O'Neal at him. Utah has a lot of versatile perimeter defenders and especially point of attack defenders on Garland, so they could frustrate him. Because again, I've talked about this a few times if you're a regular listener, but Milwaukee has given opposing teams the formula to slow down and frustrate this Cavs team. And a lot of it leans on slowing down and frustrating Darius Garland. You saw it a lot against Golden State. They threw Andrew Wiggins at him. They threw a lot of interesting defensive looks at him. Andrew Wiggins just really played well. That's just the one who really sticks out in this one. But Golden State kind of gives a template too. But Garland is the head of the snake for this Cleveland offense. And if you frustrate him enough, you could probably and ideally really just nip the bud of this offense. And if he's not 100%, it could really hurt this Cavs team. And again, they can't play Rajon Rondo 35-ish minutes tonight. I mean, I know Garland only played 34, but you can't ask Rondo to play that either. I just don't think he has the physical ability and stamina to do that, especially if you don't want to burn out another backup point guard like you did Ricky Rubio, because the Cavs lean too heavily on Ricky Rubio, and I think that played a part in maybe him running that injury risk. And it's just interesting to see. Maybe the Cavs lean on Brandon Goodwin a little bit. Maybe they do a little roster shuffling and they release RJ Nembhard from his two-way contract and sign a player to a two-way deal that can kind of just alleviate and soften the blow a little bit. Maybe Brandon Knight's available if the Cavs want to get funky with it and do a reunion. I know if you are a reader of Write Down Euclid, speaking of reunions, you should subscribe, by the way. I mentioned Colt McCoy joining the Browns just as a backup quarterback option instead of Case Keenum. I don't really know what the Cavs can do here. Again, we need to see what the injury report says. I think it's reassuring that Bickerstaff doesn't seem that concerned. He used some coaching cliches to say that Garland gutted it out, which he did. I mean, playing with a back injury is tough, and trying to play through the pain and still poured it on in the fourth quarter, which is encouraging that he was able to have some offensive output in the fourth quarter after kind of feeling comfortable and finding his shot and his rhythm again. But if it kind of locks up and becomes an issue, I'm curious to see what the Cavs do. Maybe you play Rondo. Maybe you deploy a little bit more Jetty Osman at point guard. Isaac Okoro isn't back either. We can talk about him in a second, but he's going to probably be out for another week or two. And he would soak up some of those playmaking duties. Lamar Stevens kind of showed some chops in Summer League, but it wasn't much. Maybe you act as Evan Mobley at the primary offense hub, which is something the Cavs did against Sacramento. Mobley had 5 assists on the night, which is super encouraging because I think that's something that he was really good at USC, because Mobley was the offensive hub at USC because of the lack of point guard and was usually their primary initiator and playmaker. So maybe the Cavs explore that a little bit. But I think this experimenting, especially with how they are 2-1 on this road trip. They had a tough loss to Golden State. They are kind of up and down against Portland. They were definitely up and down to the wire against Sacramento. Like, it's a little bit of a mixed bag for Cleveland. I'm interested to see what will happen next. But they really miss Isaac Okoro. I think Lamar Stevens has stepped up really well for him. But if Garland's back is an issue, you got to get playmaking somewhere. And I know Point Okoro was the hot topic during Summer League. It didn't really work, but it worked in times during the regular season last year. So maybe it's something the Cavs can deploy in bursts as well. But it's going to be playmaking by committee if Garland isn't 100%. I don't think realistically he'll sit out, because if it was that bad after the game against Golden State on a second of back-to-back, and then how important Garland is one of arguably the most important player for this team and one of the 3 untouchable players for this Cavs team, he would have sat out against Sacramento, rested up Monday night, rested up Tuesday night, so he'd be fresh and ready for Wednesday against Utah. But I don't really see too much concern. We'll just kind of see how it unfolds. I'm just interested to see. But just a quick injury update. Isaac Okoro should be back in a week or two. We haven't gotten any updates from the Cavs yet on his recovery window and schedule. It's player privacy. You have to respect that. But in terms of elbow sprains, they're tricky. Thankfully, I guess this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but Isaac Okoro isn't much of a shooter to begin with, so maybe he doesn't need his elbows as much. But I think the super encouraging thing is Lamar Stevens has stepped up super well in Okoro's absence. Everyone's heaping praise on him. I consider him the heart and soul of this Cavs team because he starts the whole barking thing, and he just kind of is that dog who the Cavs have kind of just circled themselves around and just kind of made a part of this culture that they're trying to build. And I think if you're trying to ease Okoro back in after the elbow injury, because I think there's going to be a little rust, maybe he needs to play himself back into shape. You can lean on Stevens more. Maybe you lean on a little bit more Dylan Windler, because Windler didn't play much against Sacramento, but he played really well against Portland. He played really well against Golden State. He played really well against Indiana and Memphis before that. Like, that's 4 out of the last 5 games, Dylan Windler has been very effective for the Cavs. So they have some options to kind of soften the blow of bringing Okoro back slowly. And they will just kind of figure out what happens next. But we're going to put one more pin in things, and we'll be right back to talk more about some trade hypotheticals in the ether, if you will. Stay tuned. We are back. This is Evan Damerl running solo today. I thought my co-pilot Chris Manning, co-host of Locked On Cavs, though part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate you again for making us your first listen. And if you are watching us on YouTube and you haven't subscribed yet, what the heck's wrong with you? We didn't hit 1,000 in a year. That's okay. But we're getting inching closer and closer. I haven't checked the subscriber numbers while recording, but we're getting close to 1,000. I know that for sure. So why don't you help us get there? Make a YouTube account. Everyone has a Gmail account at this point. Just log in using your Gmail. Hit subscribe on Locked On Cavs, and you can look at this sweet, beautiful face that my mom thinks is handsome every single day. But Bobby Marks from ESPN did his annual trade deadline breakdown, because we are less than a month away from the trade deadline at this point. And he talked about what the Cavs were doing, and he said, surprisingly enough, this is the first time a Cavs squad without LeBron James on their roster will probably be a buyer at this deadline and looking to upgrade some of their talent. And something I've kind of stressed for a while is fill the offensive void left by losing Colin Sexton for the year and losing Ricky Rubio for the year. I think you supplanted some of the playmaking from Rubio by getting Rajon Rondo, but I still think there is room for improvement, especially in terms of offensive production, because you cannot see the Cavs realistically telling Rondo, okay, we need you to go out there and just kind of take these reckless circus shots that Rubio makes. And sometimes he makes them, sometimes he doesn't. Like I said, the Cavs can't lean on him for 35 minutes a night like they were for Rubio at points this season. So you need to explore some options. So Bobby Marks laid out this hypothetical, which people are opposed of because of the player's age and his contract situation. But he proposed setting Ricky Rubio's expiring contract because he's on the last year and making roughly 18 million, I want to say off the top of my head, to the Houston Rockets, along with a lottery protected 2022 first round pick for shooting guard Eric Gordon. And personally, I don't hate this move. If you want to add some 3-point shooting to your repertoire, to your offensive move pool. I mean, on the season, Gordon is averaging 14.4 points on 48.9% shooting. He's shooting 43.6% from 3-point range, 3.4 assists. Kind of what the Cavs are looking for, because what I've gathered from just asking folks around the league is the Cavs are looking for some more tertiary playmaking, because again, they softened the blow losing Rubio by adding Rondo, but I think you need to add a little bit more of a bump just because, again, you can't play Rondo as much as Rubio. Gordon's playing about 30 minutes a night. He is 24 games off the bench. He has started 35 of them. He started 24 of them, played 35 of them overall. And I don't think this is a bad talent play. I know people are really, 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 really weirdly enough hung up on Eric Gordon's contract. But folks, let me break it down for you real quick. So yes, Eric Gordon is making a lot of Skrilla, a lot of money, if you will. If you don't know what Skrilla means, a lot of dosh if you play Killing Floor. Phenomenal game. He's actually Houston's second highest player. So this season he is making 18.22 million, which is, pretty tough for a 33-year-old to swallow. Next season he's making 19.56 million. We'll round that up to 19.6 million. Again, tough when he's 34 years old and likely won't even be part. He'll be part of the rotation, probably won't be starting if Colin Sexton returns, and then you start Garland, Sexton, God knows, Mobley and Allen at that point. But people are hung up with the fact that he's getting paid for the next 3 seasons. Folks, his last year of his contract is not fully guaranteed. It's for 20.9 million. And let me look up the exact options for it through our friends at Spotrac. And they say if the Cavs say they did acquire Eric Gordon and they were cut him, only a couple million of it is guaranteed. That's not too bad, honestly. And in the grand scheme of things, he could be a trade asset for a contender. I think Aaron Gordon, ideally at this point in his career, would like to go to a contending team. I don't hate that hypothetical. I think it answers a lot of what the Cavs need. They need some more 3-point shooting. They need some juice because Lauri Markkanen's shot isn't falling. Kevin Love can't be relied on to play so many minutes a night, and you're seeing his minutes go down. Again, you lose that with losing Rubio and acquiring Rondo, even though Rondo's ballistic from 3. Garland is still trying to find his rhythm again. Mobley isn't a reliable 3-point shooter. The Cavs are playing bigger in an older style of basketball, but they still need to find a way to remain modern at the same time. And I don't hate exploring trading for Eric Gordon personally. Again, if Chris was here, I could bounce this off him. I'm sure he'd be opposed to it just because of the money and the age and all this other stuff. But if you're sending a lottery protected first round pick, you have to be realistic here. If this Cavs team is a playoff team this year, they have their core 3 of Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. What you need to do next is build around those 3 and maximize this team's potential to become a legitimate playoff threat and maybe a championship caliber roster a couple years down the line. Again, nothing's for certain, everything like that, LeBron would say. But it's tough to really think about maybe doing that much for such an older player because you need to think about the timeline as well, I guess, theoretically, which is where I say you don't want to be hell-bent and determined to hold on to this 2022 draft pick and add another 19, 20-ish year old to this roster because you need to spend more time and allocate assets to grow and develop this product, where I think the Cavs need to explore and entertain the idea of sending a draft pick out to get a player who is more of a known commodity who can help you now. And that's where I keep circling back to Caris LeVert. It just makes too much sense. I've heard it from multiple people at this point. Caris LeVert is not happy in Indiana. He does not get along with Rick Carlisle. I mean, they're generally grumpy in Indiana between Sabonis, Turner, and LeVert, but LeVert's like the biggest one who's just genuinely unhappy here. So I think he can be had. The Pacers just want to get rid of him. He isn't getting along with Rick Carlisle, as I've mentioned in the past. So I think It's a cold move because Ricky Rubio's done a lot of good for this Cavs team, but you can honestly send out Ricky Rubio's expiring contract along with a first round pick. Justin Rowan at the chase down when he was on floated the idea of top 4. I think top 5 protections might be realistic because, again, this Cavs team realistically could be picking in the late teens, early 20s when the season's over. I think they're on pace to win 50-something games this year, and it wouldn't surprise me if they're flirting in the mid to upper 40s by the end of the season, just how well they're playing and how surprisingly well they're playing so far. So you need to add players that make sense now. LeVert isn't on a bad deal. He's on a 2-year contract. He is making like 18 million this year. I think he's making closer to 20 million next year off the top of my head. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But he's a pretty elite corner 3-point shooter, especially in the right corner, because folks, if you're a part of the Locked On Cavs Discord, people were asking me for these numbers the other day, and I was breaking it down with them. If you were a gilded member, and there's certain ways to become a gilded member, but it's definitely something I want to explore because LeVert provides shooting, he provides defense. He's a pretty good playmaker for what it's worth, especially as a tertiary and secondary playmaker. And he's really close to Jared Allen, which kind of helps too. It helps him ease him into the situation in Cleveland a little bit. I think playing with a good friend really helps because of their time together at Brooklyn. I think JV Bickerstaff is a really good coach. He's a front runner and should win Coach of the Year this year because of how well he is coaching this Cavs team. And I'm just really surprised why LeVert just isn't a Cavalier yet. It just makes too much sense because let's say Colin Sexton comes back next year. I think you could justifiably have Caris LeVert come off the bench or start him at the 3 if you really want to just not rock the boat too much with him, or use him as a trade asset if he says, hey, this isn't working. I would like to go to more of a contending team, because the Cavs can then use his contract. They could use Larry Mark in his contract. They could combine that with draft picks and maybe some of their other assets they've acquired to maybe go make a talent play, whether it's a Jaylen Brown or whether it is Brandon Ingram, or whether it is anyone you can, or maybe even Ben Simmons, because I mean, at this point, the Cavs are used to playing with a small forward who doesn't hit 3-pointers because Larry Markkinen is from 3-point range right now. I definitely want to see how this unfolds. We, like I said, have a little less than a month to go. I am firmly banging the drum of the Caris LeVert hype train because it just makes too much sense for him as a Cavalier. You can bring him off the bench if he's okay with it next year. You can trade him, but he makes a lot of sense as the starting 2 guard. He can kind of soak up a lot of what Sexton and Rubio provided for this Cavs team. He can also help Garland a little bit to relieve some of the 3-point pressure, the defensive pressure he faces, especially on the arc and the perimeter, provide some tertiary playmaking. I think the familiarity of Jared Allen helps. I just think this is a move that just makes too much sense for the Cavs. Again, wouldn't hate the Eric Gordon move either, but if you look at like the general timeline of this Cavs team, again, should not be focused on just adding more and more young talent to this Cavs team. Like the 2nd round pick should definitely be available that Cleveland has. Like, I wouldn't be upset if the Cavs ended up not picking in this year's draft because they said, okay, we cashed in some of our chips to acquire more assets so we can make a run at the playoffs, maybe make it to the 2nd round. I think this is the peak of this Cavs team, is they can maybe pull off a 1st round upset depending on who they play and make it into the 2nd round, and just probably get crushed by Brooklyn or Miami, unfortunately, or sorry, not Miami, Milwaukee, unfortunately. But I'm interested to see just kind of how it goes from here. I am interested to see how this really plays out for the Cavs. I do think there is a move out there. I think another domino is going to drop. I've been stressing this for a while. It feels like the Rondo acquisition was the first step to kind of alleviate and make sense of the situation, because if you watched this Cavs team without Darius Garland and Ricky Rubio, and they're starting Kevin Pangos, and no disrespect to Kevin Pangos, he could beat my ass in basketball because there's a reason why he's an NBA player, and I'm at home talking about him being an NBA player. He just isn't equipped to play that many minutes. Maybe you play him in spot minutes. Maybe he needs to find his comfort level and niche still. But Brandon Goodwin having a meltdown against the Grizzlies is why they lost. I think adding Rondo answers some of the loss of Rubio. But again, you really need to address the scoring loss between Rubio and Sexton and find a player that can play at the guard or can play on the wing. Just a player like that makes so much sense. They do not need to add another big man. I think the Cavs can make a small lateral move without giving up much, because I have gathered at this point, like a lot of sources have told me that Caris LeVert can be had for relatively next to nothing. So we'll just see what happens. We'll see how this unfolds. Yeah, man, we'll see how Darius Garland looks tomorrow night against Utah. I'm going to assume he plays. If he doesn't, we'll have a quick update on why he is unavailable. I'm interested to see how they handle the physicality from Utah, especially from Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. This is the sixth team in a row that plays a very physical brand of basketball, and I don't see this anytime soon because San Antonio and Oklahoma City, no slouches, and especially Brooklyn after that. Not a tough, easy task either. But again, I really genuinely appreciate from the bottom of my heart making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On Bets, your daily one-stop shop for all your gambling needs. Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q and expert analysis and insight from Lee Sterling. It's free and available on all platforms, just wherever you find Locked On Cavs.